It's good to be back for another Friday Fill Me Up story. This time, it's from the brother of one of our earlier featured writers, McKade. 22. Written by Camden, McKade. There are staggeringly disturbing statistics among veterans with PTSD, depression, and other mental afflictions. 22 is the number of heroes losing their private battle with the aftermath of war each day. 22 lives a day is too much for those who have put themselves on the line in the shittiest of places around the world. This is the story of one of the 22. The night had been a low-key one. Shaw, and I went out for a steak dinner and a couple of beers. It was my last night there, and I'd planned to leave in the morning to head back to Vegas now that things appeared to be better. Whenever I brought up the topic of them visiting me, Shaw would change the subject or make some joke about it. His behavior was a little off, but I'd be lying if I didn't have my bad days, so I tried not to hold it against him. Mai's unease had returned, though. She drove us back in their SUV, and I tried to keep the topic light, but, again, I'm not the conversationalist type. Small talk is difficult. Shaw seemed to be growing more and more distant as the miles passed. When we got home, I tried to get Mai alone, but she wouldn't leave her husband's side. I went to my room and packed the few things I brought. It was late, and I knew I could call Tierney, but honestly, explaining my worry wouldn't be easy, and I wouldn't wish this on anyone. Cammy had texted, wanting me to come by when I got back, and I even pushed her off for now. I was good with my gut in the field, and now I felt that same sense that something is off. I stayed in my room for another hour or so, and then went out to the kitchen to get a drink. I wasn't going to be able to sleep at all, and I didn't want to disturb Shaw or Mai as they slept. I grabbed a glass from the cupboard, took down the bottle of J.D. from the top of the fridge. I needed something to take the edge off. Sipping the alcohol, I let it burn down my throat. In the field, we used alcohol to clean wounds, to keep an infection from developing. But the wounds I felt were more than skin deep. They penetrated into the darkest recesses of my mind. The nightmares were the usual, but that was only when I could sleep. I finished my drink and set the glass down in the sink. Looking out the window, I laughed. Both Shaw and I exchanged living in one desert, only to come home and put roots down in another. Shaw was from this area. He and Mai were actually high school sweethearts. I almost envied them, but I thought about what Mai was going through the last few weeks. I knew she loved him, but having your husband deployed more than he was home and then to be injured, it just had to be a lot. Now with this shit, his mood swings, locking himself away, I don't know if I could ever think of saddling someone with all that. I was about to head back to bed when I saw something moving outside. My soldier mindset kicked in, and with my heightened shifter senses, I tried to see what it was, or rather who it was. I knew Shaw kept a couple of guns around the house. One was stashed up on top of the cabinetry by the door. I made quick work to get the piece, checked to make sure it was loaded, and then moved quietly out the back porch. The scene before me unfolded in a rush. I kept my piece low and saw a man in dark clothing slinking along Shaw and Mai's fence. Whoever this asshole was didn't have a fucking clue. I inched closer and came up behind him. It was then I realized it was... Shaw? What the fuck, dude? Shh, sir. I noticed his rifle at his side, and I went to grab it, but he jerked back. He threw me signals that we would normally use in an op. Shaw, I said again, trying to jolt him out of whatever the fuck this was. Sarge, I see 3 hostiles. How do we proceed? Shaw spoke in hushed tones. I tucked my gun in the back of my waistband. I didn't need it. This was Shaw, I saw, and he was reenacting one of our missions. Shit, I was at a loss. I could lead strike teams in and out of the desert. But when I sat here in the dead of night with a good friend who was obviously having some sort of a break, I didn't know what the fuck to do. Shaw, listen. We need to go back inside. We're not on a mission. We're at your home right now. I tried to plead with him, his eyes blinking rapidly a couple of times, and I saw him readjust his grip on the rifle. I didn't need him thinking I was the enemy, so I put my hands up defensively. It's me, McKade, your friend. We're at your home in Arizona. Mai's inside, and I'm sure she would be worried if she woke up and you weren't inside with her. I saw his head whirl around again, trying to assess a threat that was not there. His head lowered and shook, like he was trying to clear the fog and let my words get through. His hold on the gun loosened, and I swiftly removed it from his hands. Let's go inside. We can talk, man. Rising to my full height, he took my wrist and stood. I could still sense his unease. I kept the gun at my right side and slapped my other hand on his shoulder. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Once we were inside, I removed the magazine from the gun I'd found in the kitchen, placed it back on top of the cabinet. The rifle I tucked alongside the fridge and out of sight. Wasn't sure how many more guns he had in his house. I kept 3 myself, but I think if I had a home, I would consider more with a gun safe. Hey, man, sorry about that, Shaw said as he brought the bottle of J.D. back down and set 2 glasses out for us. Does that happen often, man? I asked him. He used the heel of his hand and rubbed his eye. Once or twice, but not at night like this. I woke up from a nightmare and it just felt so real. Like we were back there, man. I nodded at his admission. I knew that feeling all too well. The heart racing, sweat pouring off your brow, worrying who had your 6. Praying to any god who'll listen not to let one of those insurgents blow your fucking head off. Yeah, I know what you mean, dude, I said before I sipped my drink. I didn't want the alcohol to dull my senses, because I knew he still was not right. I was already frayed before I found Shaw outside, and he needed a friend now, not some drunk asshole. We talked for a bit. He confessed that he was being consumed by these nightmares, and it was hard to snap out of it. He wasn't adjusting since getting out of the hospital and rehab. I watched my friend, my brother, break down because he didn't understand what he had become. Why couldn't it be the way it was before? I will tell you this. Watching my friend, who was easily 6 feet 3 inches tall, well over 200 pounds of muscle, cry, shocked me right down to my toes. This was the guy who had followed me into numerous firefights in the fucking trenches, and he couldn't explain why he couldn't let go of what happened over there. It makes no fucking sense. We aren't trained to understand those fucking radicals, I said, and watched as he poured himself a second glass of whiskey. I waved him off when he offered me more. He pounded the liquid back and sighed. Think you could get some sleep now? I saw the clock. It was well after 2 a.m., and I could feel myself starting to tire. Yeah, man, I just got to get something in my office, he said. We walked down the hall, and he clapped my shoulder and said, We had a good time these last few days, right? I laughed quietly so I wouldn't wake Mai up and smiled. Of course we did. We'll do it again, I promise. Shaw smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good. I wanted Mai to know she always has you, no matter what. My eyebrows furrowed a bit at his statement, but he just pushed the back of my head and laughed. Night, McKade. Thanks for being there. I walked into my room and shut the door behind me. My gut was still churning, but I chalked it up to the night's events. I was going to take him down to the VA offices first thing in the morning, get him some help. I was going to talk to Mai and get this plan rolling for them. It's the least I could do for one of my guys. I stripped out of my pants and settled into bed in just my boxer briefs, wondering what else I could do to help. My window was open. I could hear the bugs outside. I turned on my side and willed sleep to pull me under, but apparently the tired feeling I had not 15 minutes ago in the kitchen was just a sick joke. I ran my hands through my hair and groaned. Tyranny was my usual sleep aid, and being away from her was proving to wreak havoc on my senses. I grabbed my phone off my night table, thumbed through a few pictures I had of her. I was about to open a text to her when I heard the sound. It pierced the night air, and the noises outside ceased. I knew that sound all too well. It was a single gunshot, and it just tore through the last of my hope. I sprang to my feet, swung the door open again, looking for a threat. The door to Mai and Shaw's bedroom opened, and I saw her fear-stricken face. "Go back in your room. I'll come get you when the coast is clear." But she didn't move. Instead, she just clung to one of my arms, then walked behind me. My jag knew where the sound came from. It was Shaw's office down the hall, the same place he told me he was going when we said goodnight to one another not more than 20 minutes ago. Why did I fucking leave him? This couldn't be happening. I could feel Mai trembling behind me as I reached the doorknob and twisted. "Whatever happens, keep your head down and stay behind me," I said to her quietly. My gut knew. I didn't want to fucking know. But as soon as I opened the door, it all became real. My heart pounded in my chest, and I ran to my friend who'd been sitting in the chair, now hunched over. My training kicked in. I assessed his wound. Single gunshot wound to the head. "We need to control the bleeding." "I need a medic! Get me a fucking medic!" I roared. I pulled his body from the chair and started pushing on his chest. "Baker, I need cover. Shaw's been hit." I heard the crunch of bones with every forceful thrust as I manually pumped his heart. I knew from my training this could happen when administering CPR. Again I roared, "Get me a medic!" Why the hell was no one listening? Where the fuck was Joker and Baker? It was then that a woman came into my line of sight, her wild-colored hair flailing around me, her screams piercing my ears. I shook out of the fog I was in and fell backwards, looking down at my hands covered in blood. Oh, fuck. This wasn't a battle. Where did my head just go? I stumbled and slipped, trying to grab Mai's shoulders, the limp body of my brother between us. The words Shaw had said just before I turned to walk into my room echoed in my head as I pulled her away from his body. Mai! Mai! Her screaming and efforts to fight me to get back to his lifeless body were all in vain. Even in this state, her small form was no match for me. She crumbled in my arms, and her punches against my chest became weaker as she screamed for her husband. I don't know how we managed, but we got to the living room and I called 911 as Mai sobbed in my arms. Within a few minutes, the house was swarming with first responders. My mind went on autopilot as I relayed the events to the police. Time passed as the cops realized what had occurred. Our stories corroborated what had happened, and when the ME confirmed Shaw had been killed by a self-inflicted gunshot wound an hour later, we sat and let the weight of the situation smother us. Mai sobbed in my arms. I did my best to console her, but this was fucking hell. There was a commotion, and we watched as his body was removed in a large black bag by the coroner's office. Time slowed for me. I saw the downcast eyes, and some shot sympathetic looks my way. Mai's head was buried in my shoulder. and I was glad she couldn't see their stares. They didn't have a fucking clue. This was just a guy who blew his head off to them. A female officer had crouched low to talk to Maya again, and I felt the anger in me snap. If there were stages of grief, then this was the fucking raging part for me. I jumped up, and 2 officers held me back, thinking I was going after the officials wheeling Shaw's body out of the house. "That's a United States Army Ranger you have there. He did more for this country. Don't... Please." I couldn't form a single complete sentence. I didn't know what I wanted them to do. But they needed to know who he was. Show some fucking respect. The room had gone eerily silent all around me, and I watched as hats were removed, and a few saluted as he was carried out of the house. I dropped to my knees and angrily beat at the ground. My fists were bloodied and badly swollen by the time I was able to stop. An EMT walked up to me a few moments later and offered to help clean them up. I probably cracked a few knuckles, but I didn't care. The minutes felt like hours as they passed. But it was only about 15 minutes since I saw one of my best friends taken out in a body bag. Another good man gone too soon. Mai's parents had arrived at some point, and I watched them huddle around their daughter and then carefully help her walk out of the house. A police officer appeared to me, and the medic left me, mentioning something about taking Motrin and probably getting an x-ray in the morning. "You have somewhere to go, son?" I looked up to the officer and just shook my head. "I'll figure it out. Don't worry." "Okay. But we found this, and I thought you should maybe read it. I'm real sorry about your friend, son." He held out a folded piece of paper, and I took it, opening it slowly, realizing what it was. And I read my friend's last words to the woman he loved. "I'm so sorry, Mai. I love you, and you deserve better. I know you won't understand this, and I know I've failed you so many times over. There was no saving me. Please, don't blame yourself. I love you always. Shaw." I resisted the urge to rip that letter stained with his blood to shreds. How could he think this? We were just talking, and he agreed to get help. His whole mood had shifted since I arrived. He was better. I don't understand it. I stood and got on my weary legs, moved to my room. I was going to leave and find a hotel, but at this hour didn't think I'd have any luck. I owed it to Mai to stay here anyways. There would be more officials stopping by in the morning, and I'd be here, so she wouldn't have to be. I looked toward the door of Shaw's office and felt my chest tighten. The signs were there. But I thought... I shook my head and went to the room I'd been staying in. I fell face first on the bed and tried not to replay the events of the night over and over again. Finally, I fell into a deep, restless sleep.